All right, just imagine for a second. You look up at the sky, our familiar sky, but there's something new. Our little blue marble is suddenly rocking a magnificent, shimmering set of rings, just like Saturn. Let's really get into this, because the consequences would be, well, they'd go way, way beyond just a pretty view. What you'd end up with is a planet that looks like home, but it's playing by a completely different set of rules. As one source put it perfectly, we'd be living in a world simultaneously familiar and profoundly transformed. It'd be shaped by forces we've only ever seen from a distance.
So, what would happen if our world suddenly got this celestial crown? Let's break down the beautiful and, honestly, sometimes terrifying ripple effects of giving Earth its own rings.
Okay, so the first and most obvious change, it's the sky itself. I mean, what we see above us shapes everything. Our myths, our religions, our science. And a permanent set of rings? That would be the single most influential thing in our sky, period.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Your view would totally depend on where you are. If you were standing at the equator, you'd be looking up at this incredible, glowing archway that literally splits the sky in two. But if you were near the North or South Pole, it would just be this thin, shimmering line, way down on the horizon. Can you imagine how different our cultures would be just based on that one thing?
And think about this, the stars move, the moon moves, but the rings, they'd be a constant fixed point in the sky. You just know that ancient cultures would have seen them as a bridge to the heavens, or maybe a cosmic river for the gods. Entire cities, temples, they could all be built to line up perfectly with them. Navigation would be completely different. The rings would be woven into the very fabric of who we are.
But this isn't just about a pretty view. The ring's influence goes way beyond what we'd see, and gets into what we'd actually feel. They wouldn't just be decoration. They would actively reshape our planet's climate by casting these massive, world-changing shadows. So, the basic idea is simple, right? The rings would block the sun, and depending on the season and Earth's tilt, these enormous shadows would just sweep across the surface. You'd get these ring eclipses that could last for hours at a time, and the effect of that shadow would be instant. Imagine regions that are normally the hottest on Earth, like the tropics, suddenly plunging into a deep cool. This regular scheduled cooling would introduce a rhythm to our planet that just doesn't exist today.
And we're not just talking about a chilly afternoon. This is a total climate overhaul on a global scale. All that cooling in some areas would completely mess with major atmospheric patterns like the jet stream. It would change where it rains and when it rains. You could see deserts popping up where rainforests are today, all because of the shadows cast from above.
Okay, so beyond the climate, just think about the light itself. The rings wouldn't just block sunlight during the day. Oh no, they would reflect it back at us all night long, forcing every living thing on Earth to adapt to a world that never ever gets truly dark.
And when I say brighter, I mean dramatically brighter. True darkness? Gone. The rings would basically be a colossal moon made of reflective ice, bouncing sunlight all over the night side of the planet. Forget about stargazing near the equator. The glow would be so bright you wouldn't see a thing.
This constant twilight would kick off a massive evolutionary chain reaction. Predators that hunt at night might lose their advantage because their super sensitive vision wouldn't be as special anymore. Prey animals would need totally new ways to hide. And us, humans, would have built our entire civilization under a sky that was always lit up.
Okay, so we've talked about what we'd see, how the climate would change, and even how life itself would be different. But what's actually holding these massive rings together? Well, it all comes down to this invisible, super complicated dance of gravity between the Earth, our moon, and all those little particles in the rings. So a really key part of any stable ring system is something called shepherd moons. It starts with tiny bits of ring stuff clumping together. Eventually, they form a little moonlet, and once that moonlet gets big enough, its own gravity starts to sweep its path clean, carving out those beautiful, sharp gaps you see in Saturn's rings. They're like little cosmic Zambonis, constantly grooming the rings and keeping everything in order.
This also tells us something really important. Rings aren't forever. They have a life cycle. They might get created in some huge catastrophic event, like a moon getting shattered. Then, over thousands of years, they spread out. But then they start to decay, with particles raining down into our atmosphere, which would create constant, unbelievable meteor showers. Within about 100 million years or so, they could be completely gone.
All right, let's fast forward to today. What would rings mean for us right now as a civilization that travels in space? Well, it would be a classic double-edged sword. our biggest problem, and maybe, just maybe, our greatest opportunity.
So the challenge is pretty obvious. Space would become an absolute nightmare to navigate. The rings are a high-speed minefield of ice and rock. Getting our GPS and communication satellites up there would be incredibly dangerous. Every ship would need heavy-duty shielding, and we'd be stuck with these really narrow launch windows to even have a chance of getting through.
But, and this is a huge but, for all the danger they pose, those very same rings could be the key to unlocking the entire solar system. That deadly barrier could actually become our greatest asset. It all comes down to this really cool concept called in situ resource utilization. It's a fancy way of saying, use what you find in space. The rings would be this massive, easy-to-reach stockpile of water ice. We could mine that ice for water to drink, air to breathe, and here's the big one, rocket fuel. The rings would literally become our cosmic gas station, making trips to Mars and beyond way, way easier and cheaper.
And that leaves us with one final, fascinating thought. Forget the science, the climate, the technology for a second. How would we be different? How would our perspective on our own world and our tiny place in this huge universe change if every single day we looked up and saw that brilliant, silent, majestic reminder of the cosmos we're all a part of?